blood-dark braids scattered across pale concrete like fallen branches after a storm, each one severed by Officer Slater's blade as onlookers gasped. Elise Montgomery stands handcuffed against the fence, dignity stripped away strand by strand. The officer's knife slices through another section, his whispered words meant only for her. "Not so important now, are you?" He couldn't know she was the mayor's wife, or perhaps it wouldn't have mattered. As the last braid falls, Elise meets Slater's gaze with unexpected resolve. This officer has no idea whose life he just violated, nor how his casual brutality will soon expose not just his own corruption, but an entire system's rot. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Elise Montgomery stepped out of Parkside Pharmacy, paper bag in hand. She checked her watch, 3:47 p.m. Still plenty of daylight left for the 10-minute walk home. "Have a good evening, Mrs. Montgomery," called the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Hope those headaches get better." Elise smiled and waved. "Thanks, Louise. I'm hoping these new pills do the trick." She tucked the prescription receipt into her wallet, alongside the business cards that read Elise Montgomery, LCSW, psychotherapist. The day's sessions had left her mentally drained, but satisfied. 3 trauma patients making solid progress deserved a little celebration. The neighborhood transitioned from commercial to residential as she walked. Maple trees lined the streets of Westbrook Heights, their leaves just beginning to hint at fall colors. She paused to admire Mrs. Grayson's front garden. The dahlias were spectacular this year, and made a mental note to compliment her later. As the wife of the city's first black mayor, Elise had learned to balance her role as a public figure with maintaining her own identity and career. Most days, she pulled it off gracefully. Today, in her simple navy dress and comfortable walking shoes, her braids pulled back in a loose ponytail, she was just a local heading home after work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Committee meeting running late." "Dinner at 7?" Elise typed back. "Perfect. Picking up salmon on your way home?" She smiled at his immediate thumbs-up response and slipped the phone back into her purse. These ordinary moments were precious in their busy lives. Tonight would be quiet. Just dinner, maybe a glass of wine on the patio, and conversation that didn't revolve around city politics or her caseload. The neighborhood houses grew larger as she approached her street, stately homes set back from the road. Elise loved this part of her walk, the transition from bustling downtown to the quiet of residential streets. She was mentally planning her evening, change into comfortable clothes, water the plants, maybe start that novel she'd been putting off, when she noticed the patrol car slowing beside her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Police officers were common in this neighborhood, partly because of its affluent residents, and partly because it was the kind of place where people expected visible security. She nodded politely at the officer behind the wheel, expecting him to drive on. Instead, he pulled alongside her and rolled down his window. "Excuse me, ma'am." Elise stopped walking. "Yes, officer?" The officer, white, late 30s, with close-cropped hair and sunglasses despite the shade, studied her face. His name badge read Slater. "Mind if I ask what you're doing in this neighborhood?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm walking home," she said simply. "Do you live around here?" His tone was casual, but something in his posture made Elise straighten her spine. "Yes, I do." "On Oakwood Drive." She kept her voice even, professional, the same tone she used with difficult clients. Officer Slater removed his sunglasses, revealing pale blue eyes that assessed her with open skepticism. "I'm going to need to see some ID." A familiar weight settled in Elise's chest, the leaden feeling she'd experienced countless times before. She'd hoped moving to this neighborhood would mean fewer of these encounters, but apparently not. "May I ask why?" We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. He gestured vaguely. Someone matching your description. What description is that exactly? Elise asked, keeping her voice level despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Female, African American, about your height. The officer's eyes drifted to her purse, then back to her face. Just doing my job, ma'am. Elise reached carefully into her bag, conscious of how the movement might be perceived. I have my ID here, and I just came from the pharmacy picking up a prescription. As she withdrew her wallet, she caught sight of Mrs. Wilkins watching from her front porch across the street, watering can suspended mid-air. Elise gave her a small wave, hoping the neighbor's presence might provide some accountability for what was unfolding. Here's my license, she said, handing it over. She deliberately chose not to mention her connection to the mayor yet, preferring to be treated like any other citizen. She had nothing to hide and no reason to call on her husband's position. The officer barely glanced at the ID before looking back at her with narrowed eyes. Step away from the vehicle, please. Excuse me? I said step back from the vehicle. Officer Slater was already opening his car door. We've had reports of drug activity in this area, and I need to ask you a few questions. Elise took 3 steps back from the patrol car, her mind racing through protocols she'd discussed countless times with community groups. Stay calm, be respectful, document everything. Officer Slater emerged from the vehicle, one hand resting casually on his belt near his holster. He towered over her 5'6" frame. What's in the bag? He asked, nodding toward the pharmacy package. My prescription, Elise replied, keeping her voice steady. She extended the bag toward him. You can see the pharmacy label right here. Officer Slater took the bag, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Sumatriptan. What's this for? Migraines, she said, fighting the urge to add that her medical information was private. I just picked it up from Parkside Pharmacy down the street. You can call them to verify if you'd like. He handed the bag back with visible reluctance. And what brings you to this neighborhood specifically? As I mentioned, I live here, on Oakwood Drive. She nodded in the direction of her home, just 2 blocks away. You have proof of address. That ID shows an old address. Elise felt her patience thinning but maintained her composure. I haven't updated it yet. We moved here last year. A small lie. They'd been there much longer, but she saw no reason to correct his assumption that she was new to the area. We? Officer Slater raised an eyebrow. My husband and I. She still didn't mention Marcus's position. Something in her resisted using that as a shield. Across the street, Mrs. Wilkins had put down her watering can and was now standing at her gate, phone in hand. Other neighbors had noticed the scene, curtains twitching in windows, a jogger slowing his pace. Elise felt simultaneously grateful for the witnesses and humiliated by the public nature of this interrogation. Let me see that prescription again, Officer Slater demanded. This time, Elise hesitated. Is there a specific reason you're questioning me? I've identified myself and explained why I'm here. The officer's expression hardened. Ma'am, when I ask for something, I expect cooperation, not questions. I understand that, Officer Slater, she said, reading his nameplate again deliberately. But I also have rights. Unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime, I don't understand why I'm being detained. His posture shifted, becoming more aggressive. How do you know terms like reasonable suspicion and detained? You have some kind of legal training? I work with community organizations, she replied, omitting her role in actually leading those training sessions alongside her therapy practice. We educate people about their rights during police encounters. Officer Slater circled her slowly, as if inspecting merchandise. You know what's interesting? He said, his voice taking on a dangerous softness. Drug dealers often carry small amounts of legitimate prescription drugs as cover. Gives them an excuse to be in neighborhoods where they don't belong. The implication hung in the air between them. Elise felt her professional demeanor slipping. "Are you accusing me of being a drug dealer?" "I'm not accusing you of anything." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just making an observation. But if you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind if I take a look in your purse." Mrs. Wilkins was now openly filming with her phone. 2 more neighbors had appeared on their porches. Elise glimpsed Vincent Tucker, the owner of the corner market, standing outside his store further down the block, watching intently. "Actually, I do mind," Elise said, her voice firmer now. "You don't have probable cause to search my belongings, and I don't consent to a search." Something flashed in Slater's eyes. Surprise, quickly followed by anger. People in this neighborhood, particularly black people, weren't supposed to talk back. They certainly weren't supposed to know their rights. "You carrying something you shouldn't be?" he asked, taking a step closer. "Because you're acting mighty suspicious for someone who's just walking home." "I'm not acting suspicious," Elise replied, standing her ground despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I'm declining to be searched without probable cause, which is my constitutional right." Officer Slater moved even closer, invading her personal space. "You know what I think? I think you're being uncooperative. And, in my experience, people who are uncooperative usually have something to hide." The situation was escalating too quickly. Elise took a deep breath, deciding to try another approach. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job. If there's been criminal activity reported in the area, I appreciate your vigilance, but I am simply a resident walking home from the pharmacy. If you'd like to escort me to my house, I'd be happy to show you my proof of residence." For a moment, it seemed like he might accept this olive branch. Then his radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice, reporting a suspicious person matching a vague description several blocks away. Officer Slater didn't respond to the call, his attention fixed solely on Elise. "That description sounds a lot like you," he said, though the dispatcher had provided no details that would specifically match Elise. "Empty your pockets, please." "That call was for several blocks away," Elise pointed out, her frustration mounting. "And as I've said, I live here. I'm not consenting to a search." "You're creating a lot of problems for yourself right now," Slater warned, his hand now resting more obviously on his holster. "I've been nothing but respectful, and you're getting an attitude." "I'm not," Elise began, then stopped herself. She could feel herself getting emotional, which wouldn't help. "I'm simply exercising my rights, Officer Slater." "Yeah? Well, your rights are making my job harder." He glanced at the gathering audience, clearly annoyed by the witnesses. "Last chance to cooperate before I have to take this to the next level." Elise stood her ground, though her hands had begun to tremble slightly. "I've cooperated by identifying myself and explaining my presence here. I'm not legally obligated to do more without probable cause." Officer Slater's face darkened. "Turn around and put your hands against the car." "Excuse me?" Elise couldn't believe what was happening. "You heard me. Turn around now." "This is ridiculous," Elise said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "You have no reason to detain me." Officer Slater stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "I am not going to tell you again. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." The gathering crowd had grown to at least half a dozen neighbors. Vincent Tucker had moved closer, his phone visibly recording. Mrs. Wilkins called out from across the street, "Elise, do you need me to call someone?" Before Elise could respond, Officer Slater barked, "Ma'am, stay back and mind your own business. This is police business." The mention of her name seemed to momentarily throw the officer, but he recovered quickly, returning his attention to Elise. "So, the neighbors know you? That doesn't mean you belong here. Turn around, now." With witnesses present, Elise decided compliance was safer than continued resistance. She slowly turned toward the patrol car, placing her palms against the warm metal of the hood. "This is completely unnecessary," she said, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "I have done nothing wrong." "Spread your feet," Slater ordered, kicking at her ankles to widen her stance. "You're being detained on suspicion of narcotics possession, with intent to distribute." "That's absurd." Elise couldn't contain her outrage. "Based on what evidence?" Officer Slater began patting her down roughly. "Based on your presence in a high-income neighborhood where we've had reports of drug activity, your evasive behavior, and your refusal to cooperate with a lawful investigation." "I live in this neighborhood," Elise repeated, her patience finally breaking. "And carrying a prescription from a licensed pharmacy is not evasive behavior. This is harassment, plain and simple." Slater's hands moved to her purse, which he yanked from her shoulder. "We'll just see what you're carrying, shall we?" "You do not have permission to search my bag." Elise turned her head to look at him, anger replacing fear. "This is an illegal search. Resisting an officer now?" Slater's voice took on a mocking tone. "That's another charge." "I am not resisting." Elise's professional composure finally cracked. "I'm telling you that you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. I want your badge number and your supervisor's name." Something in Slater's expression shifted. A flash of surprise, followed by rage. People like her weren't supposed to demand accountability. He roughly grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. "You don't make demands here." Pain shot through Elise's shoulder. "You're hurting me." "Stop resisting," he shouted, though she wasn't fighting back. "I'm not resisting." Elise tried to maintain her position against the car, but Slater was pulling her backward now. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Wilkins shouted from across the street. "She's not doing anything wrong. Leave her alone." Vincent Tucker called out, "I'm recording all of this, officer." "Stay back," Slater bellowed at the bystanders. "Interfere, and you'll be arrested too." The situation was spiraling out of control. Elise felt tears of frustration and pain welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Officer Slater, please. This is a mistake. I've done nothing wrong. I'm Elise Montgomery, and my husband is—" "I don't care who your husband is," he interrupted, tightening his grip. "You should have thought about him before deciding to be uncooperative with a police officer." "Let go of my arm," Elise demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "There are witnesses filming this. You're making a serious mistake." "The only mistake here is yours," Slater growled, pulling her other arm behind her back. The sudden movement caused Elise to lose her balance. She stumbled backward, inadvertently pulling away from his grip. One of her braids, now loose from the ponytail, whipped around with the motion, striking Officer Slater across the face. For a split second, everything froze. Then Slater's expression contorted with fury. "You did not just hit me!" "It was an accident!" Elise gasped, horrified. "My hair just—" "Assault on an officer!" Slater roared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Before Elise could protest further, he grabbed her by the shoulders and slammed her against the nearby fence, knocking the wind from her lungs. Stars exploded behind Elise's eyes as her head snapped back against the metal links. She heard gasps and shouts from the bystanders, someone yelling about calling 911. "Please!" she wheezed, struggling to catch her breath. "I didn't—" "Shut up!" Slater's face was inches from hers, his eyes wild with rage. "You assaulted a police officer. That's a felony charge." "My braid accidentally hit you when you pulled me," Elise tried to explain, her voice shaking. "That's not assault. Please, let me explain. My name is Elise Montgomery. My husband is Mayor Marcus." "I said shut up!" Slater pressed her harder against the fence, his forearm across her collarbone, making it difficult to breathe. "Your fancy braids don't give you the right to assault an officer." There was something in his tone, when he mentioned her braids, a particular kind of contempt that sent a chill through Elise. She became acutely aware of how vulnerable she was, how quickly the situation had deteriorated from a routine stop to something dangerous. "Officer," Vincent Tucker called out, his voice steady but authoritative, "you need to calm down. She's not resisting. Everyone can see that." "Stay back," Slater shouted over his shoulder. "This woman just assaulted me, and I'm placing her under arrest." He yanked Elise's arms behind her back again, this time succeeding in cuffing her wrists together. The metal bit into her skin unnecessarily tight. She winced, but didn't give him the satisfaction of crying out. "Elise Montgomery," she said loudly, making sure the witnesses could hear. "Wife of Mayor Marcus Montgomery. I want a lawyer immediately, and I want your supervisor at the scene." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Slater's face. He glanced at the gathering crowd, many now with phones recording. Then his expression hardened again. "We'll sort out who you are at the station," he said, his voice lower, but no less menacing. "Right now, you're just another perp claiming connections." He began marching her toward the patrol car, his fingers digging into her arm. As they reached the vehicle, he suddenly stopped, staring at her braids with undisguised contempt. "You know what?" he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I don't think we're done here yet." The world around Elise seemed to slow down as Officer Slater reached toward his belt. At first, she thought he was going for his radio, or perhaps his taser. Instead, he unclipped something smaller, a folding knife with a black handle. "What are you doing?" Elise's voice caught in her throat as he flicked open the blade. "These fancy braids of yours are a safety issue," Slater said, loud enough for those nearby to hear his justification. But when he leaned closer, his voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for her. "Let's see how important you feel without them." Horror dawned on Elise as she realized his intent. "No!" she gasped. "Don't you dare!" Vincent Tucker stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Officer, that's completely unnecessary." "Back up!" Slater roared, his free hand moving to his holster in a clear threat. "All of you, back up now! This is for officer safety." The crowd reluctantly moved back, but phones remained raised, recording. "Mrs." Wilkins was frantically speaking into her phone, likely calling 911 for a police supervisor. With one hand gripping Elise's shoulder to hold her still against the car, Slater grabbed a handful of her braids with the other. She could feel the cold metal of the knife against her scalp. "Please don't do this," Elise whispered, humiliation and rage forming a knot in her chest. "Should have thought about consequences before you hit me with these," Slater growled. The first cut made a sickening sound, a harsh sawing motion followed by the release of tension as the knife severed several braids at once. Elise felt the weight disappear from one side of her head, followed by the soft thud of her hair hitting the pavement. Tears sprang to her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was more than assault. It was a deliberate act of degradation, meant to strip her of dignity. Through the shock and horror, Elise forced herself to memorize every detail. The weight of the handcuffs, the smell of Slater's aftershave, the exact words he used. "There we go," Slater said with sickening satisfaction, holding up several severed braids before tossing them onto the ground beside her feet. "That's better. These things are practically weapons anyway." He grabbed another handful, cutting through them with vicious efficiency. "Never understood why you people spend so much money on fake hair anyway." "It's not fake," Elise managed, her voice thick with rage and humiliation. "And you have no right." "I have every right," Slater cut her off, sawing through another section. "This is officer safety protocol." It was a blatant lie, and everyone watching knew it. There was no protocol that justified cutting a detained person's hair. This was purely punitive, a power play meant to put her in her place. The braids that had taken hours to create, that represented not just beauty, but cultural identity, now lay scattered on the sidewalk like discarded trash. Elise felt the uneven weight of what remained, some braids still intact, while others had been roughly hacked away. The physical pain of the rough handling was nothing compared to the violation she felt. "You will lose your job for this," she said with quiet fury, staring straight ahead at the patrol car. "I promise you that." Slater grabbed her roughly by the arm, spinning her to face him. "Threats now? Want to add that to your charges?" His eyes gleamed with malice. "No one's going to take the word of a drug dealer over a decorated officer. I am not a drug dealer. I am a licensed clinical social worker," Elise said, loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "And I am the wife of Mayor Marcus Montgomery." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Slater's eyes. He glanced at the watching crowd, then back at Elise, as if trying to determine if she was bluffing. His grip on her arm tightened painfully. "We'll see about that," he muttered, no longer sounding quite so confident. He opened the back door of the patrol car and roughly pushed her inside, not bothering to protect her head as she entered. Elise's shoulder slammed against the opposite door, sending pain shooting down her arm. She managed to right herself on the seat, the handcuffs digging into her wrists as she tried to find a position that didn't hurt. Through the window, she could see Vincent Tucker speaking urgently to other witnesses, pointing at his phone. Mrs. Wilkins was approaching the car, only to be waved back aggressively by Slater. Most disturbing was the sight of her severed braids lying on the sidewalk, some still with the small wooden beads her niece had helped select. Slater got into the driver's seat and started the engine, deliberately avoiding looking at her in the rearview mirror. "Should have just cooperated," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Simple compliance is all it takes." "There will be consequences for this," Elise said quietly, meeting his eyes in the mirror when he finally glanced back. Something in her calm certainty seemed to unnerve him. He looked away, focusing on pulling out from the curb. As they drove off, Elise could see the neighbors already gathering, some picking up their phones, others collecting the scattered braids from the ground. Vincent Tucker stood in the middle of the street, still filming as the patrol car disappeared around the corner. The drive to the station passed in tense silence. Elise used the time to center herself, to push past the shock and humiliation and think strategically. She knew the system well enough from her work with community organizations to understand what would happen next. Booking, processing, statement-taking. She would refuse to speak without a lawyer present. She would document everything. When they arrived at the central precinct, Slater parked in the restricted area behind the building, away from public eyes and security cameras. This detail, too, Elise filed away. "Out!" he ordered, opening her door. Elise struggled to exit the car with her hands bound behind her back. Slater made no move to help, watching with poorly concealed satisfaction as she awkwardly maneuvered herself out of the vehicle. "Officer Slater!" a voice called from the rear entrance of the station. A uniformed sergeant stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. "Is everything all right? We got calls about a disturbance involving your unit." "Just bringing in a suspect, Sarge," Slater replied smoothly. "Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. The usual." The sergeant approached, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Elise's appearance, her uneven, partially cut hair, the obvious lack of any threatening demeanor. "Ma'am, are you injured?" he asked, scrutinizing her more carefully. "Yes," Elise replied firmly. "This officer slammed me against a fence, applied handcuffs too tightly, and cut off my hair with a knife. I'd like to file a formal complaint immediately, after I speak with my attorney. My name is Elise Montgomery, and my husband is Mayor Marcus Montgomery." The sergeant's expression shifted from concern to alarm. He shot a sharp look at Slater, whose face had drained of color. "Wait here," the sergeant ordered Slater, then gently took Elise's arm. "Mrs. Montgomery, Let's get you inside and remove those cuffs. We'll sort this out immediately." As they walked toward the building, Elise heard the sergeant mutter under his breath, "Jesus Christ, Slater! What have you done?" Inside the precinct, controlled chaos erupted. The sergeant, whose nameplate read Wilson, immediately removed Elise's handcuffs, wincing at the red marks they'd left behind. "Get the captain," he barked at a nearby officer. "Now!" Then, more gently to Elise, "Mrs. Montgomery, would you like some water? Medical attention?" Elise's wrists throbbed, and her shoulder ached where she'd been slammed against the fence, but her focus remained clear. "I'd like my phone call, please. And I want this documented. Photographs of my injuries and what's left of my hair." Officer Slater hovered nearby, his earlier swagger replaced by a nervous agitation. "Sarge, I had no idea who she was. She was uncooperative and assaulted me during—" "Enough!" Sergeant Wilson cut him off sharply. "Wait in the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone else." As Slater reluctantly retreated, a flurry of activity surrounded Elise. A female officer appeared with water and a first aid kit. Another brought forms for her statement. The station's atmosphere had transformed from the casual indifference that had greeted them upon arrival to an anxious, deferential urgency. "Mrs. Montgomery," Captain Reynolds said, as he hurried into the room, adjusting his uniform tie. "I can't express how this is completely—" He seemed unable to form a complete sentence, his eyes darting between Elise's unevenly cut hair and the growing bruises on her wrists. "Captain," Elise's voice was steady despite her racing heart, "I want to be clear. I'm not receiving this treatment because I'm the mayor's wife. I expect every citizen to be treated with the same dignity and respect I'm now being shown. The fact that they aren't is precisely the problem." Reynolds blanched but nodded. "Of course, absolutely. We'll take your full statement, and I assure you Officer Slater will face appropriate—" The station doors burst open, and Marcus Montgomery strode in, his usual composed demeanor fractured by evident distress. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they found Elise. "Elise!" He rushed to her side, taking in her disheveled appearance with growing horror. "My God! What happened to you? Your hair!" He reached toward the uneven remains of her braids, but stopped short of touching them. "Mr. Mayor," Captain Reynolds began, "I want to personally assure you—" "Not now," Marcus cut him off, focusing entirely on his wife. "Are you hurt? Do you need a hospital?" "I'm okay," Elise said, though okay couldn't have been further from the truth. "Physically, at least." Marcus's jaw tightened as he took in the marks on her wrists, the small cut on her temple where she'd hit the fence. "Who did this?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Officer Derek Slater," Elise replied, watching her husband's face darken with recognition. "Slater? The same one who had those excessive force complaints last year?" Marcus turned to Captain Reynolds, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "The same officer your department cleared of wrongdoing?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "Sir, I assure you, we're taking this incident very seriously. Officer Slater has been removed from duty, pending—" "Removed from duty?" Elise interrupted, her eyebrows rising. "Not suspended?" "It's standard procedure," Reynolds explained hastily. "He'll be on administrative assignment while we investigate." "He should be suspended without pay," Marcus said firmly. "At minimum." Captain Reynolds hesitated. "There are protocols we have to follow. Union regulations." "I don't want to hear about protocols," Marcus snapped. "That officer assaulted my wife and cut off her hair. In what world is that not grounds for immediate suspension?" The tension in the room grew palpable. Elise studied her husband's face. The barely contained rage, the political calculations already forming behind his eyes. She placed a hand on his arm, partly to calm him and partly to center herself. "Marcus," she said quietly, I want to go home. We can deal with the rest tomorrow." He looked at her, conflict evident in his expression. The mayor in him wanted immediate action, decisive consequences. The husband in him wanted to protect her from further trauma. "Of course," he said finally, "but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." As they prepared to leave, Sergeant Wilson approached with a plastic evidence bag. "Mrs. Montgomery, some of your neighbors gathered these." Inside were the braids Officer Slater had cut off, collected from the sidewalk. The sight of them, detached, lifeless, hit Elise with unexpected force. These weren't just hair. They were part of her identity, removed without consent in an act meant to humiliate and degrade. She accepted the bag with a nod, unable to find words. In the car, Marcus made call after call, to the city attorney, to his chief of staff, to the police commissioner. His voice remained measured, but carried an undercurrent of controlled fury. Between calls, he reached for Elise's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll handle this quietly," he assured her. "I'll have that officer's badge by morning. The department will issue a formal apology. We'll make sure this never happens to anyone else." Elise stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. "Quietly," she repeated, testing the word. It felt wrong in her mouth, insufficient for the magnitude of what had occurred. "Yes," Marcus nodded, misreading her tone. "We'll resolve this through proper channels. The last thing we need is a media circus that inflames tensions in the city." Something hardened in Elise's chest, a seed of resolve taking root. "And what about all the people this happens to who aren't married to the mayor? Who handles their cases quietly?" Marcus glanced at her, concern creasing his brow. "Elise, I understand you're upset." "This isn't about being upset," she interrupted. "This is about justice. And justice isn't served through quiet backroom deals." The car pulled into their driveway, but neither moved to get out. In the silence between them, two fundamentally different approaches to addressing a wrong were beginning to collide. Derek Slater sat alone in the precinct break room, his third cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. The captain had ordered him to stay put while they sorted things out, but the whispers and sidelong glances from his colleagues told him everything he needed to know. He'd arrested the mayor's wife, cut her hair. The career suicide jokes practically wrote themselves. His phone vibrated with a text from Mike Donovan, the police union rep. "Don't say anything else. On my way." Slater rubbed his face, replaying the incident in his mind. The woman had been uncooperative from the start, questioning his authority, refusing to comply. Then she'd hit him with her hair. He hadn't known who she was, but it wouldn't have mattered if he had. The law applied to everyone equally, didn't it? Even to the high and mighty who thought they were above it. The door swung open, and Captain Reynolds entered, his expression unreadable. "The mayor's gone. He wants your badge." "She assaulted me," Slater insisted, leaning forward. "I followed protocol for an uncooperative suspect." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Protocol includes cutting off a detained person's hair? Show me where that's in the manual." "Officer safety," Slater muttered, though he knew it was thin. "Those braids hit me in the face. They could have been used as a weapon." Reynolds sighed heavily. "Donovan's here. You're on administrative duty until further notice. Desk work, no public contact. Don't talk to the press. Don't post on social media. And for God's sake, don't go anywhere near the mayor or his wife." As Reynolds left, Mike Donovan entered, his bulldog face set in determined lines. "All right, let's get your side of this before they crucify you." Across town, Elise sat on the edge of her bathtub, gathering the courage to look in the mirror. She'd avoided her reflection since arriving home, instead focusing on documenting her injuries, photographing the bruises on her wrists, the cut on her temple, the remaining uneven braids. Evidence, her lawyer's mind insisted. Everything is evidence. The bathroom door opened gently, and Marcus appeared with a steaming mug of tea. "Zoe Chen returned your call," he said, referring to their friend and civil rights attorney. "She can be here in 30 minutes. Elise nodded, accepting the tea. "Thank you." Marcus hesitated, then sat beside her on the tub's edge. "I spoke with Commissioner Walsh," he said carefully. "Slater's been placed on administrative duty. They're expediting the investigation." "Administrative duty," Elise repeated flatly. "So he's still getting paid while I'm sitting here trying to decide whether to cut off the rest of my hair or walk around looking like this." She gestured to her uneven braids, some cut brutally short, while others remained intact. Marcus reached for her hand. "The commissioner's hands are tied by union rules. But he assured me—" "I don't want assurances," Elise cut in, pulling her hand away. "I want accountability. Real accountability." "That's what I'm trying to get you," Marcus said, frustration edging into his voice. "But we have to work within the system." "The system is designed to protect people like Slater," Elise replied, standing up to finally face the mirror. The sight made her inhale sharply. Half her braids gone, the remainder hanging awkwardly, emphasizing the violation. "This isn't just about me, Marcus." "Of course it isn't," he agreed. "But as mayor, I have to consider the entire city. If this turns into a public spectacle—" "A public spectacle?" Elise turned to him, incredulous. "Is that what you think seeking justice would be?" The doorbell interrupted their growing tension. Marcus checked his watch. "That'll be Zoe. I'll let her in." As he left, Elise turned back to the mirror, squaring her shoulders. In her reflection, she saw not just herself, but every client she'd counseled through trauma. Every community member who'd shared stories of police overreach. The difference was her platform, her access, her husband's position. If she couldn't use those advantages to effect real change, what was the point of having them? At the police union headquarters, Mike Donovan stood before 24 officers, including several from Slater's precinct. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "This is a political witch hunt." Officer Slater followed protocol with an uncooperative subject who assaulted him. The only reason this is an issue is because she turned out to be connected to power. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled officers. "The department needs to stand firm," Donovan continued. "If they cave to political pressure on this one, every arrest you make could be second-guessed. Every use of force scrutinized through a political lens." In the back of the room, Sergeant Wilson shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen the footage from bystanders' phones. It didn't match Slater's version of events. But speaking up now, in this room full of union brothers, would be career suicide. "What about the hair cutting?" someone asked. "That's not in any protocol I know." Donovan waved dismissively. "A split-second decision in a volatile situation. Officer safety comes first. Always. You think some politician's wife should get special treatment because of who she's married to?" The question hung in the air, calculated to appeal to the officer's sense of fairness, while subtly reframing the narrative. It wasn't about excessive force, it was about equality under the law. "We're already hearing that witness statements are being questioned," Donovan added. "Evidence from the scene may have been misplaced. This is how it starts. They can't attack the arrest itself, so they try to muddy the waters." Sergeant Wilson's discomfort grew. He knew exactly which evidence had been misplaced. Slater's body cam footage, which had mysteriously failed to upload to the system. As shift supervisor, he should report it, but doing so would make him a pariah among his peers. As the meeting continued, Wilson slipped out quietly, weighing duty against loyalty, principles against self-preservation. Outside in the parking lot, he sat in his car, staring at his phone and the number for the department's Internal Affairs Division. Back at the Montgomery home, Elise sat across from Zoe Chen, who was reviewing the photographs with professional detachment that barely masked her personal outrage. "This is textbook excessive force," Zoe said, setting down her tablet. "The haircutting alone is assault and battery. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence. The department will try to handle it internally," Marcus interjected from his position by the window. "Commissioner Walsh has assured me." "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor," Zoe replied, her tone cooling slightly, "I represent Elise, not the city, and internal investigations rarely yield justice for victims of police misconduct. I want to file a formal complaint," Elise said firmly, "not just with Internal Affairs, but with the Civilian Review Board. And I want to speak publicly about what happened." Marcus turned to her, alarm evident on his face. "Elise, we need to think strategically. Going public could jeopardize the investigation, inflame tensions, or it could ensure the investigation isn't swept under the rug," she countered. "How many complaints against Slater have already disappeared into the black hole of internal reviews?" The tension between them was palpable. Zoe glanced between husband and wife, recognizing the fundamental divide in their approaches. "You both want the same thing," she offered diplomatically, "justice and accountability. You just differ on how to achieve it." "No," Elise said quietly, meeting her husband's troubled gaze. "I'm not sure we do want the same thing. Marcus wants resolution. I want reform." The press conference wasn't Elise's idea, not initially. She'd simply wanted to file her complaint and give a statement to the Civilian Review Board. But when a reporter from the Tribune called asking for comment on the incident involving Officer Slater, it became clear the story was already leaking. "Better to control the narrative than react to it," Zoe advised during their strategy session in the Montgomery's living room. "If you speak first, you set the terms of the conversation." Marcus paced behind the sofa, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hurried, hushed tones with his communications director. The tension in his shoulders telegraphed his feelings about the situation. "We'll hold it at the community center," Elise decided, watching her husband's discomfort. "Not City Hall." 2 days after the incident, Elise stood before a forest of microphones, her remaining braids now completely removed, her natural hair cropped close to her scalp. A practical solution that had become a powerful visual statement. The bruises on her wrists had deepened to purple, still visible despite the long sleeves of her navy blazer. "I'm here today, not as the mayor's wife, but as a citizen who experienced the kind of police misconduct that many in our community have suffered silently," she began, her voice steady despite the cameras and the absence of her husband, who had cited a scheduling conflict. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate abuse of power." She recounted the events methodically, without embellishment. The unnecessary stop, the escalation, the cutting of her hair as a form of humiliation. "I had resources many others don't," she concluded. "I had witnesses. I had status. I had immediate access to legal counsel. And still, the officer who assaulted me remains employed on administrative duty rather than suspension. This is why I've filed a formal complaint with both Internal Affairs and the Civilian Review Board, and why I'm speaking publicly today. Because if this is how the system works for someone with every advantage, imagine how it fails those without them." The questions came rapid fire. Where was the mayor? Did she believe race was a factor? Had she faced intimidation since coming forward? Elise handled each with the composure she'd developed over years as both a therapist and public figure. Then came the question she'd been dreading. "Mrs. Montgomery, sources within the police department claim Officer Slater's body cam footage contradicts your account. How do you respond to that?" Her prepared confidence wavered momentarily. This was the first she'd heard of any body cam footage. Zoe stepped forward smoothly. We welcome the release of any and all evidence, including Officer Slater's body cam footage. In fact, we've been requesting it since the incident occurred. As they left the community center, Zoe muttered under her breath, "They're bluffing. If they had exonerating footage, they'd have released it already." "Unless they're doctoring it," Elise replied, a chill running through her despite the warm day. Vincent Tucker swept the sidewalk outside his corner market, trying not to be obvious about the black SUV parked across the street. It had been there for 3 hours. The second time this week he'd noticed an unmarked police vehicle watching his store. The bell over his door jingled, and he looked up to see Sergeant Wilson entering, not in uniform, but clearly identifiable by his bearing. "Mr. Tucker," Wilson nodded, browsing the snack aisle with studied casualness. "Nice place you've got here." "Been here 20 years, Vincent replied, continuing to sweep. "Something I can help you with, Sergeant." Wilson selected a bag of chips, approaching the counter. "Just picking up a snack. And checking in. Word is you've got some interesting security footage." Vincent kept his expression neutral. "My cameras cover the storefront. Standard security measure." "Right." Wilson paid for the chips. "Thing about electronic evidence, it can be temperamental, files corrupt, systems crash." He met Vincent's eyes directly. "Be a shame if anything happened to your footage before the hearing." It wasn't a direct threat, nothing Vincent could report as intimidation, but the message was clear enough. "I appreciate your concern for my security system," Vincent replied evenly, "but I've already provided copies of the relevant footage to multiple parties, for safekeeping." Something like respect flickered in Wilson's eyes, followed by resignation. He nodded once and left without another word. Through the window, Vincent watched him speak briefly to the occupants of the SUV before it pulled away from the curb. Vincent pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Mrs. Chen? It's Vincent Tucker. I think we should move up our meeting. Things are getting interesting around here." At City Hall, Marcus stared at the police report on his desk, his frustration mounting. Key details were missing, or contradicted what Elise had told him. The officer's statements described a belligerent woman who had physically assaulted Slater. The report made no mention of haircutting, categorizing Elise's claim as unsubstantiated. His phone buzzed with a text from his chief of staff. "Police union statement going out in 20. They're backing Slater 100%. You need to respond." Before he could reply, another message arrived. This one from Elise. "Just got call from Mrs. Wilkins. 2 detectives visited asking about her unauthorized recording of police activity. They suggested she could face charges." "This is intimidation, Marcus." The mayor set down his phone, conflict churning within him. As a husband, he was outraged. As a political leader responsible for the entire city, he was trapped. The police union represented hundreds of officers whose cooperation he needed to govern effectively. Publicly opposing them could fracture an already tense relationship, potentially impacting public safety operations throughout the city. The door to his office opened, and his communications director entered, expression grave. "Sir, CNN just picked up the story. It's going national." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The careful balance he'd maintained throughout his political career, reformer but pragmatist, progressive but unifying, was in danger of collapsing. And at the center of it all was his wife, standing firmly on principle while he calculated political costs. "Sir," his communications director pressed, "we need a statement. Are you standing with the department while the investigation proceeds, or—" The unspoken alternative hung in the air. Standing publicly with his wife against the police department he technically oversaw. "Draft 2 statements," Marcus said finally. "I'll decide within the hour." As his staff filed out, Marcus picked up his phone again, staring at Elise's message about witness intimidation. This was quickly becoming about much more than one officer's misconduct. It was about the system itself, the very system he operated within and had promised to reform. His finger hovered over the call button beside Elise's name. They hadn't really talked since the press conference, not beyond practicalities and logistics. The growing distance between them felt like another kind of violence, another kind of loss. Before he could decide, breaking news alerts lit up his phone. Police union claims mayor's wife assaulted officer. Calls for independent investigation. The battle lines were being drawn, with Marcus caught in the middle. The talk radio host leaned into his microphone, voice pitched with practiced indignation. So now we're supposed to believe that a decorated officer with 15 years of service just suddenly decided to go rogue? That he stopped the mayor's wife for no reason? Come on, people! Across town, on a more progressive station, another host countered, "The evidence is clear. Multiple witnesses, visible injuries, and a history of complaints against this officer. The question isn't whether it happened, but how many others have suffered similar treatment without the resources to fight back." Elise turned off the car radio as she pulled into the community center parking lot, steeling herself for the evening ahead. The town hall meeting had been scheduled weeks before the incident, meant to discuss local education initiatives. Now, it would inevitably become about something else entirely. Inside, the division was physically apparent. One side of the room filled predominantly with supporters wearing blue ribbons, a symbol adopted by those standing with Elise. The other side featured small blue flag pins, a show of solidarity with law enforcement. The middle seats remained conspicuously empty, as if occupying them might suggest neutrality in a situation where many felt neutrality was no longer possible. Marcus stood at the podium, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the strain of recent days. His statement following the police union's press release had been diplomatic to the point of being unsatisfying to both sides, acknowledging his wife's experience while emphasizing the importance of due process and thorough investigation. Elise took her seat in the front row, aware of the eyes tracking her movement, the whispers following in her wake. The response to her speaking out had been both better and worse than she'd anticipated. Better in the groundswell of support from community organizations, women's groups, and civil rights advocates. Worse in the vitriol directed at her on social media, the accusations of lying for political gain, the threats deemed serious enough that private security now monitored their home. As Marcus began his opening remarks, the tension in the room was palpable. He outlined the agenda: school funding, after-school programs, teacher retention, but the restlessness of the audience suggested these topics were not why most had attended. Before we move to our scheduled discussion, Marcus acknowledged finally, I want to address the situation that's on everyone's mind. A formal investigation is underway regarding the incident involving Officer Slater. I ask for patience as this process. What about the body cam footage? Someone shouted from the back. Why hasn't it been released? Marcus adjusted his tie, a tell Elise recognized as discomfort. That's part of the ongoing investigation. I can't comment on evidence. Because it doesn't exist, another voice called out. Or because it would prove Mrs. Montgomery is telling the truth. From the other side of the room came a counter. Maybe it proves she's not. Maybe that's why her lawyer's trying to block its release. Elise stood, unable to remain silent in the face of such blatant misinformation. That's absolutely false. We've been requesting the body cam footage since day one. The meeting devolved from there, with the moderator struggling to maintain order, as community members on both sides voiced their positions with increasing emotion. Marcus attempted to redirect the conversation back to education several times without success. My brother's a police officer, one woman said, voice trembling with anger. He puts his life on the line every day, and now he's being treated like a criminal because of one incident that's being blown out of proportion. "My son was stopped 3 times last month just walking home from school," countered a father from the other side of the room. "No cameras, no witnesses, no mayor's office to call. Who speaks for him?" Throughout it all, Elise noticed one attendee who remained silent. Police Commissioner Walsh, sitting stiffly in the back row, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met briefly, he was the first to look away. As the meeting finally concluded, Elise was approached by a young black woman who introduced herself as a nursing student at the local university. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said quietly, glancing around as if concerned about being overheard. "The same thing happened to my cousin. Not the hair cutting, but the rest of it. Being stopped for no reason, roughed up, humiliated." Nobody believed her. Before Elise could respond, a middle-aged white man in a police supporter's t-shirt approached from the other direction. "My daughter wants to be an officer," he said without preamble. "She believes in service, in helping people, and your crusade is making her question that choice because of one bad apple." "If the department held that bad apple accountable," Elise replied carefully, "your daughter could serve with pride in a system worthy of her ideals." The man shook his head. "You don't get it. You're tearing this city apart." As he walked away, Elise felt Marcus's presence beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "That could have gone better," he murmured. "Actually, I think it went exactly as expected," Elise replied. "People are talking about the real issues now, not just manageable policy tweaks." Marcus sighed, the weight of his dual responsibilities evident in his posture. "Commissioner Walsh cornered me after the meeting. He's threatening to resign if Slater is fired before the investigation concludes." "Let him," Elise said, surprising herself with the hardness in her voice. "It's not that simple," Marcus countered. "The whole command structure could follow him. The department would be in chaos." "It already is in chaos," Elise pointed out. "Just a version of chaos that's been normalized for too long." As they walked toward the exit, a reporter from the local news approached with a microphone extended. "Mayor Montgomery, are you concerned that this incident is becoming a divisive force in the community? And Mrs. Montgomery, do you regret going public given the backlash?" Elise felt Marcus tense beside her, calculated response already forming. Before he could speak, she stepped forward. "What's divisive isn't speaking truth," she said clearly. "It's the systems that make speaking truth necessary. And no, I don't regret it. But I do regret that it took happening to someone with my privileges for people to finally pay attention." The flash of cameras captured the subtle distance between husband and wife as they exited the building. Physical proximity, masking an ideological gap that seemed to widen with each passing day. Derek Slater hunched over his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone with a scowl etched on his face. The department-mandated psychologist had suggested he avoid social media and news coverage of the incident, but he couldn't help himself. His name was everywhere, morphing from Officer Slater to Officer Derek Slater to Derek Haircut Slater on the more vicious corners of the internet. "You shouldn't be reading that garbage," his wife Melissa said, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. The concern in her eyes had hardened to something like resentment over the past week. Their teenage children had stopped bringing friends home, tired of explaining why their dad was all over the news. "They're calling me a racist," he muttered, tossing the phone aside. 15 years on the force. Commendations. Risking my life every day. And now I'm some kind of monster because of one entitled woman who wouldn't follow simple directions." Melissa sat across from him, arms folded. "The hair-cutting, Derek. What were you thinking?" It was the question he'd been avoiding, even with the department shrink. The truth was, he didn't know. One moment he'd been following procedure with an uncooperative suspect. The next, he'd been filled with a rage he couldn't quite understand or explain. Something about her defiance, her education, her confidence in a system he knew would ultimately protect her. It had triggered something primal and ugly. It was officer safety. He repeated the line he'd given everyone from his union rep to internal affairs. Her braids had already hit me in the face once. Melissa's expression showed she didn't believe him, but she didn't press further. The unspoken tension between them thickened. His phone buzzed with a text from Donovan, the union rep. "Turn on Channel 4, now." Vincent Tucker stood on the steps of City Hall beside Zoe Chen, facing a sea of reporters with cameras and microphones extended toward them. Behind them, Elise Montgomery and 3 other community members who had filed complaints against Officer Slater in the past formed a solemn row of support. After witnessing the incident involving Mrs. Montgomery and Officer Slater, Vincent began, his deep voice steady despite his evident nerves. "I immediately preserved the security footage from my store's external cameras. That footage clearly shows what happened from start to finish, with no ambiguity." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "I initially provided this evidence to the police department, trusting the system to work. However, when I followed up regarding the investigation, I was informed the footage was inconclusive and partially corrupted, neither of which is true of the copy I retained." Murmurs rippled through the assembled press corps. "Furthermore," Vincent continued, "I have since been subjected to what I can only describe as intimidation tactics, frequent patrols past my business, questioning of my employees, suggestions that my license renewals might face extra scrutiny. These actions have convinced me that the proper authorities cannot be trusted with this evidence." Zoe Chen stepped forward. "That's why Mr. Tucker has provided his footage directly to Mrs. Montgomery's legal team, the Civilian Review Board, and the District Attorney's Office. We're also making it available to the media today." On cue, large screens behind them flickered to life, displaying the high-definition security footage. The angle provided a clear view of the entire encounter. Elise being stopped, questioned, her compliant but firm responses, Slater becoming increasingly aggressive, the accidental contact from her braid during the struggle, and most damning of all, the deliberate cutting of her hair while she was handcuffed and restrained. The footage played without narration, the raw images more powerful than any commentary could be. When it concluded, the silence that fell over the assembled crowd spoke volumes. Zoe stepped forward again. "This footage conclusively disproves Officer Slater's claim that Mrs. Montgomery was combative or posed any threat. It shows a clear-cut case of excessive force and what can only be described as a hate crime. We are calling for Officer Slater's immediate termination and criminal charges." Vincent cleared his throat. "I'm not an activist. I'm a business owner who's been in this community for 20 years. Coming forward puts me at risk, but silence would make me complicit. And I'm not the only one with evidence." He gestured to the 3 people standing behind him. These individuals all filed complaints against Officer Slater in the past 2 years. All were dismissed due to lack of evidence or inconclusive witness statements. But Mrs. Wilkins, he indicated an elderly woman with a cane, recorded her grandson's encounter on her phone. Mr. Rivera, a middle-aged Latino man, nodded. "Has dashcam footage. Ms. Okafor, a young woman in nursing scrubs, has hospital records documenting her injuries." Zoe concluded, "This officer's misconduct follows a pattern that the department has systematically ignored. The only unusual thing about Mrs. Montgomery's case is that it couldn't be swept under the rug. We've established a legal fund for all victims of police misconduct in our city, with particular focus on those targeted by Officer Slater." As questions erupted from the press, Elise stepped forward to the microphone. "This was never just about me. It's about accountability for everyone. regardless of who they know or what position they hold. No one should need to be married to the mayor to receive justice. Across town, Commissioner Walsh slammed his office door shut, having dismissed his staff after watching the press conference on the department's television. He'd known this was coming, had seen the writing on the wall the moment the Montgomery incident report crossed his desk with its suspicious omissions and contradictions. He picked up his phone and dialed the mayor's direct line. "Marcus, we need to talk. That footage is going to blow this department wide open." "I've seen it," Marcus replied, his voice uncharacteristically hard. "I want Slater's badge and a complete overhaul of your complaint review process on my desk by morning." "It's not that simple," Walsh objected. "The union contract, the arbitration process." "Make it simple," Marcus cut him off. "Or I'll find a commissioner who can." Walsh stared at the phone after the mayor hung up. 26 years on the force, the last 8 as commissioner. He'd navigated countless political storms, balanced competing interests, maintained the thin blue line while making just enough reforms to keep the activists at bay. But this was different. The footage was unambiguous, the witnesses credible, the pattern unmistakable. And for the first time in his career, Walsh found himself without a clear path to political survival that didn't require moral compromise he was no longer sure he could make. In the Slater household, the television went dark as Derek jabbed the power button on the remote. His face had drained of color, hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "They edited that footage," he insisted to the empty room, Melissa having walked out halfway through the press conference. "They cut out the part where she threatened me, where she swung at me." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The footage was complete, unedited, a perfect record of his worst moment, now broadcast for the world to see. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built, the justifications he'd repeated to himself and others, all collapsed under the weight of irrefutable visual evidence. His phone began ringing, Donovan, no doubt, with damage control strategies. But before he could answer, a text from an unknown number appeared on his screen. "We stand with you, brother. Don't let them sacrifice a good cop to appease the mob." It was the first of many similar messages that would flood in over the coming days. A digital brotherhood of officers and supporters rallying around one of their own, even as the evidence against him mounted. City Hall's imposing marble-columned facade had always given Marcus a sense of purpose. Today, it felt more like a fortress under siege. He stood at his office window, watching dueling protests in the plaza below. Police supporters on one side, justice advocates on the other, uniformed officers forming a tense line between them. "The council votes in an hour," his chief of staff reminded him, placing another stack of messages on his already cluttered desk. "We're still 2 votes short on the accountability package." Marcus nodded grimly. The reforms he'd proposed in response to the Slater incident were modest by activist standards, but considered radical by the police department. Civilian oversight with actual disciplinary authority, mandatory body cameras with penalties for deactivation, prohibition of qualified immunity for officers found to have violated civil rights. Common-sense measures that somehow had become controversial. Councilman Rivera's office called again. His chief of staff continued. "He's feeling intense pressure from the union. They're threatening to pull patrol coverage in his district if he votes yes." "That's outright blackmail," Marcus said, anger flaring. "It's effective blackmail," came the pragmatic reply. "Peters is wavering too. The union maxed out donations to his re-election campaign last quarter." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elise. "Coming to the vote. Don't worry, I'll sit in the back." Their relationship had been strained but cordial in the 3 weeks since the video's release. They slept in the same bed, ate occasional meals together, maintained a united public front. But the easy intimacy that had defined their marriage for 15 years had been replaced by something more formal, more cautious. "Tell Rivera and Peters I want to see them, separately, before the vote." As his chief of staff departed, Commissioner Walsh was shown in, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. "Mayor," Walsh began without preamble, "I've got 20 officers threatening to call in sick tomorrow if this package passes. Another 30 ready to turn in retirement papers." "They're bluffing," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely confident. "Some are, some aren't." Walsh lowered himself heavily into a chair. "You need to understand what you're asking. These reforms change the fundamental relationship between officers and the department. They feel betrayed. My wife was assaulted by one of your officers who remains on the payroll," Marcus countered, his patience wearing thin. "Citizens are regularly mistreated without consequence. Who's betraying whom, exactly?" Walsh had the decency to look uncomfortable. Slater was wrong. Nobody's defending what he did. But punishing the entire department for one officer's actions— "It wasn't one officer's actions," Marcus cut in. "It was one officer's actions followed by his colleagues' silence, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and departmental stonewalling. That's what we're addressing." The commissioner studied Marcus for a long moment. "You know I'll have to resign if this passes." "I know you're threatening to resign," Marcus corrected him. "There's a difference." Walsh stood, adjusting his uniform jacket. "For what it's worth, I tried to handle Slater after the previous complaints. The union blocked me every time. Arbitration overturned every disciplinary action. Which is exactly why we need these reforms," Marcus said, unmoved by the commissioner's attempt at absolution. "The system, as it stands, protects the wrong people." After Walsh left, Marcus sat alone, weighing the political calculus. His support for the reforms had already cost him allies. The business community worried about public safety messaging. Moderate constituents who had once been his base were now calling his office with concerns about rushing to judgment and undermining police authority. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Sir? Your wife is here." Elise entered, dressed in a simple but elegant burgundy suit, her natural hair now grown enough to form a short, neat crown. The formal attire couldn't hide the toll of recent weeks, the slight shadows under her eyes, the new tension she carried in her shoulders. "I thought we were meeting at the council chambers," Marcus said, rising to greet her. "We need to talk first." Elise closed the door behind her. "I just heard from Zoe. Someone leaked the disciplinary review board's preliminary findings. They're recommending Slater be reinstated with back pay after a 30-day suspension." "That's impossible," Marcus protested. "The video, the witness statements. The union contract stipulates that officers can only be terminated for clear violations of department policy," Elise explained. "They're arguing that there's no specific policy prohibiting cutting a detainee's hair, so it doesn't qualify as a fireable offense." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "That's the most absurd technicality I've ever heard." "That's the system," Elise replied simply. "The system you've been trying to reform incrementally for 5 years. The unspoken accusation hung between them, that his caution, his political pragmatism, his willingness to compromise, had contributed to the very circumstances that allowed her assault to occur. I've been watching you navigate this," Elise continued, her voice softening. "Trying to balance everyone's interests, maintain relationships, find the politically viable middle ground. It's what makes you a good mayor." She paused. "But sometimes there is no viable middle ground between justice and injustice." Marcus sat heavily on the edge of his desk. "If I go all in on these reforms and lose the vote, I lose political capital I might have used for incremental progress. If I compromise to get something passed, I betray you and everything you've been fighting for." "This isn't about betraying me," Elise said. It's about standing by your own principles, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. She reached for his hand, the first gesture of real closeness she'd initiated in weeks. For 5 years, I've watched you make the politically strategic choice. Today, I'm asking you to make the right one. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Mayor, Councilman Rivera is here. Marcus squeezed Elise's hand, then released it. Send him in, he replied, making his decision. And reschedule everything after the council meeting. I'll be drafting a speech. The vote stands at 4 in favor, 4 opposed, the council clerk announced, her voice echoing in the packed chamber. Council Member Peters to cast the deciding vote. All eyes turned to Peters, a 3-term veteran known more for fence-sitting than moral courage. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the scrutiny. While I support our police department, he began cautiously, recent events have made it clear that our oversight systems are inadequate. However, I believe the mayor's proposal goes too far, too fast. I vote no, but would welcome a more moderate package for consideration next quarter. A murmur ran through the chamber, disappointment from reform advocates, relief from police supporters. Marcus's face revealed nothing as he absorbed the defeat, but Elise, watching from the back row, could read the tension in the set of his shoulders. The council president tapped her gavel. The police accountability package fails by a vote of 5 to 4. Next item. Madam President, Marcus interrupted, rising from his seat in the front row. I request the floor for a point of personal privilege. It was an unusual move. The mayor typically didn't speak during council proceedings, except when specifically invited. The council president hesitated, then nodded. Marcus approached the central podium. Ignoring the note his communications director frantically passed his way. For the first time in his political career, he set aside his prepared remarks. 3 weeks ago, my wife was wrongfully detained, assaulted, and humiliated by an officer sworn to protect and serve our community, he began, his voice steady and clear. Today, this council had an opportunity to ensure such abuses never happen again. You chose differently. He looked directly at the council members who had voted no. Let me be absolutely clear about what happens next. As mayor, I will use every executive power at my disposal to implement these reforms. I will direct the city attorney to review all police union contract provisions that shield officers from accountability. I will establish a special prosecutor's office for police misconduct cases. Gasps and whispers rippled through the chamber. This was not the cautious, consensus-building Mayor Montgomery they knew. To those council members who opposed these measures today, I respect your right to vote your conscience. But know this, when the next Derek Slater abuses his authority, and without these reforms there will be a next one, history will remember who stood in the way of preventing it. He turned to address the gallery, his eyes finding Elise in the back row. To the citizens who have suffered similar injustices without the platform to speak out, I hear you now. Your mayor stands with you. As Marcus returned to his seat, amid stunned silence, the message was clear. The careful political balancing act was over. He had chosen a side. In the back of the chamber, Elise felt something unlock in her chest, a vindication more meaningful than any council vote could provide. Her husband had finally, publicly joined her fight. Not because she was his wife, but because it was right. Derek Slater straightened his tie in the mirror, rehearsing his testimony one last time. Tomorrow's public hearing before the Civil Service Commission would determine his future on the force, and, in his own mind, the future of policing itself in the city. You keep adjusting that tie, you're gonna wear it out, commented Mike Donovan, the union rep who'd become a fixture in the Slater household these past weeks. He sat at the dining room table, surrounded by preparation documents and legal pads. I need to look professional, Slater replied. Trustworthy. You need to look confident, but not arrogant, Donovan corrected. Remorseful about the incident escalating but firm that you followed procedure under difficult circumstances. Melissa appeared in the doorway, arms folded. And where exactly in the procedure manual does it say to cut someone's hair off? Her support had wavered, then fractured as the unedited video spread across social media, as neighbors stopped inviting them to barbecues, as their son came home with a bloody nose after defending his father's name at school. You don't understand the pressure of the job, Slater snapped, an argument they'd had countless times now. Split-second decisions. Cutting her hair wasn't split-second, Melissa interrupted. It was deliberate and cruel. Donovan cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe we should focus on tomorrow's strategy. Slater turned back to the mirror, avoiding his wife's eyes. The mayor's thrown the entire department under the bus to protect his wife. If I go down for doing my job, every officer in this city becomes afraid to enforce the law. Your job was to protect and serve, Melissa said quietly. Who were you protecting when you cut her hair, Derek? She left before he could respond, the soft click of their bedroom door more damning than any slam could have been. She'll come around, Donovan said, without conviction. Now, let's go over the commissioner's likely questions again. Across town at the Montgomery residence, Elise sat across from Zoe Chen at the kitchen table, reviewing her own testimony preparations. They'll try to make this about your behavior, Zoe cautioned. Question why you didn't immediately identify yourself as the mayor's wife. Suggest you were being deliberately provocative. Elise nodded. Because apparently, citizens without powerful spouses deserve whatever treatment they get. Exactly, Zoe agreed. We need to keep redirecting to the central issue. Officer Slater's actions were unjustified regardless of who you are or how you responded. Marcus entered, loosening his tie after another long day at City Hall. The strain of recent weeks showed in the new lines around his eyes, but there was also a renewed sense of purpose in his bearing. Since taking his public stand, he'd moved with the decisive clarity of someone who had finally reconciled his personal values with his professional responsibilities. Security briefing, he said, setting a folder on the table. The hearing's becoming a flashpoint. Both sides are planning demonstrations outside the building. Threats? Elise asked, having grown unfortunately accustomed to such discussions. Marcus hesitated. Nothing specific enough to take action on, but the chatter is concerning. He didn't elaborate, but Elise knew what he meant. Online forums where supporters of Slater discussed her in dehumanizing terms, speculated about her home address, questioned what she really deserved. I've arranged additional security for tomorrow, he continued. Plainclothes officers from the county sheriff's department, not our own force. The implication was clear. He no longer fully trusted the city police to protect his wife. Zoe gathered her papers. I should go. Big day tomorrow. She squeezed Elise's hand. Get some rest if you can. After she left, Marcus poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Elise at the table. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm exhausted, Elise admitted, but also resolved. She touched her hair, now grown enough to form a short natural crown. This was never just about what happened to me. I know, Marcus said softly, and I'm sorry it took me so long to fully understand that. They sat in companionable silence, the first truly comfortable moment they'd shared in weeks. The distance between them had begun to close since Marcus's speech at the council meeting, not with grand gestures, but with small recognitions of shared purpose. Commissioner Walsh submitted his resignation today, Marcus said finally. Effective after the hearing. Elise looked up, surprised. He's actually going through with it? He claims it's a matter of principle, that my executive actions undermined his authority. Marcus swirled his wine thoughtfully. But, off the record, I think he's tired of being caught in the middle. This case broke something in him, forced him to see the department as it is, not as he pretends it is. Who will replace him? That's the million-dollar question, Marcus sighed. I need someone who can implement real reform without losing the rank and file entirely. It's a nearly impossible needle to thread. Elise considered this. Maybe it's not supposed to be comfortable. Real change rarely is. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone. His expression darkened as he read the message. The union just issued another statement. They're saying the hearing is a politically motivated show trial and suggesting officers call in sick tomorrow in protest. Will they go through with it? Possibly, though I think it's more likely they'll all show up, in uniform, in force. He set his phone down. They want to send a message. So do we, Elise said quietly. That's what tomorrow is about. Vincent Tucker locked the door of his corner market, noticing the black SUV that had become a near-constant presence on his street. The vehicle's dark windows revealed nothing about its occupants, but the message was clear enough. We're watching. As he pulled down the security gate, his phone rang. An unknown number. Mr. Tucker, a male voice said when he answered. I understand you're testifying tomorrow. Vincent's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? A concerned citizen, the voice replied. Someone who thinks you should reconsider your statement. Small businesses like yours, they depend on police response times, don't they? Would be a shame if emergency calls from your address started getting delayed. Vincent's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. Is that a threat, officer? Not at all, the voice replied smoothly. Just a reality check. Neighborhood's changing. More crime these days. Think about your priorities. The call ended. Vincent stood motionless under the streetlight, weighing fear against conviction. After a long moment, he dialed Zoe Chen's number. There's something I need to tell you before tomorrow, he said when she answered. I'm not the only one getting these calls. Mrs. Wilkins, Mr. Rivera. We've all been contacted. By whom? Zoe asked sharply. They don't identify themselves, Vincent replied. But the message is always the same. Reconsider your testimony. There was a pause before Zoe spoke again. Will you? Vincent watched the black SUV finally pull away from the curb, memorizing the partial plate number visible in the streetlight. No, he said firmly. Some things matter more than being safe. The Civil Service Commission hearing room wasn't designed for high-profile cases. With seating for only 60 spectators, hundreds more gathered outside, watching on hastily erected screens in the plaza. Inside, the 5 commissioners sat at an elevated table, their expressions carefully neutral as they called the hearing to order. Elise sat with Zoe at the plaintiff's table, aware of Marcus directly behind her in the first row of public seating. Across the aisle, Officer Slater and his representatives formed a tight cluster, a physical embodiment of the thin blue line. Behind them sat rows of uniformed officers, many wearing small blue ribbons of solidarity. Commissioner Wallace, a retired judge serving as chair, tapped her gavel. This hearing will come to order. Today, we address the complaint filed by Mrs. Elise Montgomery against Officer Derek Slater regarding the events of September 12th. Mrs. Montgomery, you may present your testimony. Elise approached the witness table, took the oath, and faced the commissioners directly. She recounted the incident chronologically, her voice steady and clear despite the weight of Slater's stare from across the room. She described the unnecessary stop, the escalation, the moment her braid accidentally struck him during the struggle, and the deliberate cutting of her hair as a form of punishment and humiliation. Officer Slater didn't just violate department policy, she concluded. He violated my dignity, my personhood, and the trust that should exist between law enforcement and the community they serve. What happened to me was an abuse of power, one made possible by a system that has repeatedly excused, hidden, and enabled such abuses. During cross-examination, the police union's attorney tried repeatedly to shift focus, suggesting Elise had been uncooperative, questioning why she hadn't immediately identified herself as the mayor's wife, implying she had political motivations for escalating a routine encounter. "Mrs. Montgomery," he asked with practiced skepticism, "isn't it true that your husband was facing criticism for being too soft on crime before this incident? And that your public campaign against Officer Slater has conveniently shifted the narrative?" Zoe objected immediately. "Irrelevant and inflammatory." "I'll allow it," Commissioner Wallace ruled, "but tread carefully, counselor." Elise met the attorney's eyes directly. "My husband's approval ratings are irrelevant to whether Officer Slater assaulted me. The video evidence speaks for itself." After Elise's testimony, Vincent Tucker and the other witnesses corroborated her account. The security footage played on screens throughout the room, the stark visual evidence landing like a physical blow each time Officer Slater grabbed Elise's braids and cut them off. Finally, it was Slater's turn to testify. He approached the witness table in full dress uniform, medals displayed prominently on his chest. "Officer Slater," his attorney began, "please describe the events leading to Mrs. Montgomery's detention." "I observed an individual who matched the description of a suspected drug dealer operating in that neighborhood," Slater testified, his voice projecting professional detachment. "When I attempted to question her, she became evasive and uncooperative." "And the physical altercation?" "She resisted the lawful detention and struck me in the face with her hair," Slater continued. "At that point, officer safety became my primary concern." "Is that why you removed portions of her hair?" Slater hesitated, seeming to recognize the weakness in his position. "Her braids had already been used as a weapon against me. I made a split-second decision to eliminate that threat." A murmur ran through the room. Even some of the officers shifted uncomfortably at this justification. During cross-examination, Zoe's approach was methodical and devastating. "Officer Slater, could you show the Commission where in the department's use of force policy it authorizes cutting a detained person's hair? It's not specifically mentioned, but—" "Yes or no, officer." "Is haircutting listed as an authorized use of force?" "No, but—" "Thank you," Zoe interrupted. "Now, let's review your disciplinary record." Despite objections from Slater's attorney, the Commission allowed the introduction of his prior complaints, officially considered unsubstantiated, but forming a clear pattern of escalation with minority citizens. "Officer Slater," Zoe continued, "the security footage shows Mrs. Montgomery was already handcuffed when you cut her hair. Was she still a threat at that point?" Slater's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand what it's like out there. Every day we face disrespect, resistance, people who think they're above the law." "Was Mrs. Montgomery a physical threat while handcuffed?" Zoe pressed. "She was disrespectful," Slater insisted, his voice rising. "Acting entitled, like the rules didn't apply to her." "So this was about respect, not safety," Zoe observed quietly. "About teaching her a lesson." Something in Slater snapped. Someone needed to. People like her, thinking they can talk back, question our authority. "People like her?" Zoe interrupted. "What exactly do you mean by that, Officer Slater?" The room fell silent, as the implication hung in the air. Slater seemed to suddenly realize what he'd revealed. He looked toward his attorney, who was staring at him in barely concealed horror. "I meant uncooperative suspects," Slater backpedaled, "regardless of who they are." But the damage was done. His momentary loss of control had exposed the underlying bias that the department had worked so hard to deny existed within its ranks. Even the officers seated behind him had gone still, some looking downward, others exchanging uncomfortable glances. Commissioner Wallace cleared her throat. "I think we'll take a 15-minute recess before closing statements." As the room emptied, Commissioner Walsh, attending his final official function before resignation, approached Marcus in the hallway. "That didn't go well for him," Walsh said quietly. "It went exactly as it should have," Marcus replied. The truth finally came out. Walsh studied him for a moment. "You know, firing Slater won't fix everything. The issues run deeper." "I know," Marcus acknowledged. "That's why we're just getting started." Inside the now empty hearing room, Elise remained seated, gathering her strength for the final phase. Across the aisle, Slater sat alone, abandoned even by his attorney during the recess. For a brief moment, their eyes met, her steady gaze against his smoldering resentment. Neither looked away, each recognizing that what transpired between them had become something much larger than a single encounter on a city sidewalk. It had become a reckoning. 6 months later, Elise stood at the podium in the community center, surveying the packed room. What had begun as her personal trauma had evolved into something transformative, for the city, for the police department, and for her own sense of purpose. "Today marks the official launch of the Civilian Oversight Board," she announced to enthusiastic applause. "For the first time in our city's history, complaints against law enforcement will be reviewed by an independent panel with real investigative and disciplinary authority." The journey to this moment had been neither easy nor straightforward. The Civil Service Commission had unanimously ruled against Officer Slater, recommending his immediate termination and the implementation of sweeping reforms. But that victory had merely been the beginning of a longer, more complex battle. The police union had fought back hard, challenging the new accountability measures in court, organizing work slowdowns, and warning of mass resignations. Some officers had indeed quit, 14 in total, most with disciplinary histories similar to Slater's. Their departures, which the union had presented as a crisis, had ultimately allowed the department to recruit a more diverse cohort of officers committed to the new vision of community policing. "This board represents our community," Elise continued, gesturing to the 7 members seated behind her. A retired judge, a civil rights attorney, a former officer from another department, and 4 community representatives, including Vincent Tucker. They bring diverse perspectives, but share a common commitment: ensuring that the power entrusted to law enforcement is never abused. From his seat in the front row, Marcus watched his wife with undisguised pride. Their relationship had emerged from the crucible stronger, their different approaches to change, his institutional pragmatism and her principled advocacy, now working in tandem rather than opposition. As the newly appointed board members were introduced, Elise caught sight of Captain Reynolds, now Acting Commissioner Reynolds, standing at the back of the room. He'd been a surprising ally in the reform process, one of the few command staff who'd remained after Commissioner Walsh's resignation. Initially skeptical, he'd come to recognize that rebuilding community trust served the department's interests as much as the public's. After the ceremony, Elise mingled with attendees, accepting congratulations and listening to stories. So many people had approached her over these months, sharing their own experiences of police misconduct that had gone unaddressed. Each account reinforced her conviction that the changes, difficult as they had been to implement, were necessary and overdue. "Mrs. Montgomery," a voice called from behind her. She turned to find Mrs. Wilkins, the neighbor who had first recorded the incident with Officer Slater. "I brought someone who wanted to meet you." Beside her stood a young black woman, perhaps 20, regarding Elise with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. "This is my granddaughter, Tiana," Mrs. Wilkins explained. "She just finished her first semester at the police academy." Elise's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The academy? That's wonderful." Tiana nodded, her posture straightening with pride. "When I saw what happened to you, and then how you fought for change instead of just revenge, it made me think maybe the best way to fix the system is from the inside." If they're going to recruit a new kind of officer, I want to be part of that. Something warm and unexpected unfurled in Elise's chest. The realization that her ordeal had not just exposed problems, but inspired solutions. She reached out to shake Tiana's hand. The department will be better with officers like you. Later that evening, Elise and Marcus walked through their neighborhood, retracing the route where she had been stopped that September day. The trauma of the incident had faded enough that they could now pass that spot without her feeling the ghost of handcuffs on her wrists or the phantom weight of braids being cut away. "Heard anything from Slater?" Marcus asked, the question he'd been careful not to raise until now. Elise shook her head. "Zoe says he's left the state. Found work as a security guard somewhere in Nevada." After his termination, Slater had become increasingly isolated, his support even among fellow officers evaporating after his testimony. The final blow had been the district attorney's decision to charge him with assault and official misconduct, charges he had eventually pled down to avoid trial, accepting probation and a permanent ban from law enforcement work. "Do you ever regret going public?" Marcus asked. "It would have been easier to handle it privately, the way I initially suggested." Elise considered this as they paused by Mrs. Grayson's garden, the dahlias now replaced by early spring tulips. "Easier for us, maybe, but not for Vincent Tucker's nephew, who was stopped 3 times in 2 weeks for matching a description. Not for Mrs. Wilkins's grandson, who was told he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. Not for all the people without our platform or resources." Marcus nodded, taking her hand as they continued walking. "You changed this city, you know. Not just policies, but perspectives." "We changed it," Elise corrected him. "Your political savvy made the reforms possible. My advocacy just made them necessary." As they approached their home, they noticed a small group of officers chatting with neighborhood children, part of the new community engagement initiative. One of the officers, a young black woman, spotted them and waved. The simple, respectful gesture represented the beginning of something that had seemed nearly impossible 6 months ago. Trust, slowly being rebuilt. Elise touched her hair, now grown into a style of her choosing, rather than one forced upon her by violence. In its regrowth, she had found a metaphor for the work still ahead. The painful cut had been just the beginning. The true transformation came in how you chose to grow from it. "There's still so much to do," she said, watching the officers and children interact. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but now we know it can be done." As they continued toward home, Elise felt the weight of the past 6 months. The trauma, the fight, the slow progress toward justice settle into something like purpose. What had happened to her could not be undone, but its meaning could be transformed through the changes it inspired. In that transformation lay not just healing, but hope. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.